Welcome to the Recess Life Podcast. This is the place where we explore play and what it means to get back to your inner child. I'm Louise, your host. Join me as I chat with teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, and thought leaders about how we can live a life of more play and impact. Let's get it started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have Gary Hirsch with us today, and I'm so excited. So for those of you that don't know Gary, he is an artist, illustrator, and co-founder of On Your Feet, a collision between business and the arts, and an early pioneer of bringing the skills and principles improvisers use on stage with businesses such as Nike, Intel, Disney, Apple, and others. And Gary also has another project that he works on very closely that we'll talk about. But before we get to that, hi, Gary. How are you?
Hey, I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today.
You bet.
You and I know each other from a few years back. We've worked together before, and
Yep.
I've just always admired everything you've done and have always just so enjoyed being in your company whenever we've been able to meet. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I'm so excited
Oh,
for our
yeah.
conversation.
No, me too. I was super thrilled when you reached out and excited that this is, I think, your first podcast, right?
It
At least
is.
in the series. So happy to be the first one. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is my first one, and it's super fun and nerve-wracking at the same time, but that's what makes it fun.
Sure. Fair enough.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about On Your Feet and also the other project you work on, which is called Bot Joy.
Bot Joy. Yeah, sure. Well, I think in some ways they're two separate projects, but they all come together under the same piece. So my big interest is in how people co-create. So how does it work when two or more folks get together to solve a problem or to create a piece of art or to dance or whatever it is? What can happen? What's the magic that can happen in a co-creative environment? And so On Your Feet is sort of an expression of that in the business world, actually. So I use the practices and the behaviors that improvisers use on stage. I've got a deep background in improvisation, and we use sort of those tools and methodologies, which are massively playful and interactive and have a whole sort of world of lesson around co-creation. I use that in the business context. And then I was brought up, and my whole background is in visual art. And so I've also tried to have used that same idea when it comes to making art itself. So creating art that invites the public to interact with it, invites the public to finish the story that the art is starting to tell. And I do that in big ways and small ways, and that's what Bot Joy is. So even though one is sort of an expression in the sort of theatrical world and business world, and the other is in sort of public and street art world, they all come together under this sort of endless fascination I have for how people make things together. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, they definitely both have a connective thread that connects them. Yeah.
Yes.
Very cool. So pretty much you have built your life around creativity and play and co-creation. It sounds like not too shabby.
No, my God, it's so great. It's so funny because my kids still don't quite understand what I do, actually. And, one's 23, one's 18. I'm about to be an empty nester in 2 weeks. And I think they sort of nailed it a couple years ago when my son goes, I get it. You just play with grown-ups for a living, is what you end up doing. I'm like, that's cool. That seems like a great way to define it. I'll take that. So that's as good of a definition as I can figure out.
That's so funny. I feel like it's usually the parents that are saying that they don't understand what their kids do, but you have the reverse.
No, exactly. It's totally reverse to my household. They have no idea. My dad does art and improv and business. I don't know what he does. I'm like, that's fine.
It's all good. It's all good. Wow, that's awesome. So not sounds like a lot of fun. So
is.
How did you land here? So how did you get to this place where your life is built around all these values and these concepts of play and co-creation and collaboration?
Well, it depends on how far back you want to go. I mean, I would imagine, and I tell this story. I tell this story a lot on stage when I speak. But there is a story. I guess I got here when I was really, really young. So when I was really young, like 7 and 8 years old, I had all these crazy, really vivid nightmares. And the short story on this is my dad ended up asking me to draw them. And so it was kind of a way to cope with it. And these were really scary. And I know about them, not because I remember them so much, but because my parents saved all these drawings. So I can go back now and even look at what these images look like. And so what would happen around that would be I would sort of have a nightmare. I would go into my parents' room. My dad would bring me down to the kitchen. He put in cinnamon toast. That was our ritual. And then he would hand me a pen and paper, and he goes, draw these scary nightmares. And so that became a really important ritual in my life. And as part of that process, my dad and I would name these characters and create stories around these characters and basically try to wrap a little bit of control around these really scary things. And it was such a vivid experience. And one night my dad, and I know this because, again, we've got all these artifacts around these events early in my life. My dad said to me, if you draw these things, you can also erase them. And so we started to erase the drawings, and then the nightmares started crazily to sort of disappear.
Wow.
So that was a co-creative process, and that was super informative for me. And a lot of things have happened to me and my dad, but we're almost like competitively creative now. Like, he's a poet and I'm an artist, and we'll get together and we kind of don't even listen to each other anymore. We're like, let me show what I made. And he's like, no, let me show what I made. And it's nuts, but it all started back then. And then, really, and this is kind of no lie, ever since I was that young, I've always been interested in making things with other people. What does that look like? How does that feel? And when I was, fast forward into the improv thing, when I was in graduate school, I was studying to be an art teacher at the time, visual art teacher. But I was also really interested in acting. But my problem was I couldn't memorize scripts. I was just dismal at them. I still am to this day. I can't do it. It was really smart because I clued in really early on that I love acting, but not like that. And one day in grad school, I walked into an improv rehearsal by mistake. I was playing the gentleman caller in the Glass Menagerie, but I walked into the wrong rehearsal room, and these guys were improvising. They were like doing these improv scenes. And I was thrilled. I was like, that's what I want to do because there's no script involved. And so that's how the script thing, the improv thing came about, because I couldn't do the script thing. And then one more leap of fast forwardness, and you've met this character. I ran into a guy named Rob Poynton, who was actually in the business world. So he's an ad planner, and he did a lot of a lot of things in the marketing world. And he and I met to talk about a T-shirt that he wanted to commission from me as an artist. And that conversation, I won't give you all details because we'll be here all day, but it basically led to a question. And his question was, what else do you do? And I said, I do improv. And he said, well, could you do it with 90 ad execs in Phoenix, Arizona in 3 weeks? That was like really specific.
Wow.
And of course, if you do improv, you just say yes to shit and worry about it later. So I was like, sure. Yep. And then next thing I know, that's what I was doing. And that turned into On Your Feet, because he sort of was like, oh, this is so powerful. And we could do this with businesses. Are you interested? And I just kept saying yes to stuff. And he kept asking stuff. And next thing you know, this business was born.
Wow. So there wasn't a plan for it to land here necessarily, but your life, because you said yes to things, it progressed and evolved to where you are today. Totally.
And there's no way you could have planned it. Like, how could you have planned the idea that you'd have a business that uses theater and you'd sort of run around the world helping people with really significant business issues, like develop new ideas and products and services, and how do we create a culture that is inclusive, and how do we collaborate better with people that we have to work with? Like, those are the questions we get to tackle. I could have never planned this. There's no way. Mm-hmm. It just was it's too weird.
Yeah.
Really.
And there was no one else doing anything like this, right? Really?
Well, I would not say we're the first. I mean, I'm sure someone can prove that's not true. Mm-hmm. I think a pioneer is probably right, because I don't think it was being developed at the time. This is back in 98. Where it was happening, the pockets of this, obviously there's amazing things happening in the improv theater world. But in terms of applied improv, which is what this work is, you apply it to something else, is pretty rare. There's a small pockets of universities that were doing it. And that's kind of how we started. We piloted here in Portland at Portland State University. They had this guy named Scott Dawson, who's still a dear friend. He was the hippie dean of the business school. And he would wear, tie-dye t-shirts and stuff. And he said, let's bring in storytelling and improv to the MBA program. And that's how I started to do this work, because he asked me to come and do that. But besides that, there was not a lot of this stuff happening, I think, out there in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What alignment to have a hippie dean
I
meet
know.
you and say, yes, come and do this. Right.
Totally, totally. And he's so great. And Scott is like, he was so helpful early on because, I mean, I sort of joke hippie dean. The guy is brilliant. Not that hippies aren't. Sorry, now I'm getting myself in trouble. But basically, because I had a lot of self-doubt in the beginning. Like, you can imagine, right? So improviser and artist, but I'm now walking into business meetings. I'm having to, like, ask for money and things like that. And Rob, he would really help coach me. Like, Rob would say, look, next time you're on stage doing an improv scene, just find a way to practice saying, just work it into the story. Just say $10,000 just to get used to saying it. So that was me sort of dealing with that self-doubt. And then Scott said to me once, I came to him, we were doing a big work. This is early on. I got some project with Starbucks. And I was really nervous about it. And big company and And so I came to him, I said, Scott, what if it doesn't work? And he's like, he's so zen. He's like, how can it not work? Ooh. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? He goes, it just won't work the way you planned, but it'll work in some way. And I was like, you are the hippie dean. You're such a hippie dean. So he was great. He was instrumental.
Oh my gosh. And what he just said there, I mean, isn't that life anyway? It's not going to work out the way you think it is.
Well, that's why, to me, and I was just having this conversation recently with a colleague, it's like improv is seen as an art form and a piece of entertainment, and people think you have to be like, whose line is it anyway, and massively talented. But if you just take the idea that it's a piece of theater or an art off the conversation, we're doing it now. Like, everything is advised. We didn't plan this conversation. Mm-hmm. You may have. I'm sure you did. You were like, I'm going to ask him this, this, and this. But you didn't know what I was going to say.
Nope.
So it's pretty deep. Like, life is improvised. Like, growth systems and living systems are improvised. They deal with things in the moment. Plants do it. Animals do it. Human beings do it. I mean, glaciers do it. If a glacier's moving along and it suddenly hits something it can't move around, it does this. It shifts. And the idea of trying to plan and predict everything, I don't even think serves us now as a culture. So I think it's pretty deep, really fast, actually. Mm-hmm. But it's really fun.
Yeah, we're going to go there for sure. So why do you think we as humans, why do we latch on to certainty so much then?
Sure. Well, great question. I sometimes, my colleague Shelley here, she goes, improv is the art of dealing with uncertainty. And I even take it a step further. It's like, it's not of dealing with it, it's of thriving under it and actually getting excited by it. So I think in its base level, certainty, uncertainty. Uncertainty is scary, and things that are uncertain are scary by fact of being uncertain. Like, I'm sure you've been in a situation, I've been in this too. It's like, I don't know, let's see. I got a letter from the IRS, and it was pretty cryptic. It was like, we've noticed a discrepancy, please call. That is like scary and uncertain, right? And It's the IRS, which is by far, to me, the scariest thing almost on the planet. And living in that uncertainty, and of course you call the IRS or something and you go through bureaucracy of phone chains, so you still don't, so your anxiety starts to build and build and build, and then they kind of go, oh, we noticed something, they tell you what it is. And I think in this instance it was like, they couldn't read my handwriting because I have crappy handwriting and I wrote something in by hand instead of typing. And they're like, what is that? And I went back to look at my records and I go, oh no, that's a 9, not a 6. And I go, great, thank you. But, so that was cool because it resolved in a way that was, wasn't damaging. But even when it comes back as something sort of negative, that feels different than not knowing. Mm-hmm. I think, and again, evolutionarily speaking, and I'm not a scientist, I know some, but my sense is that, when you hear the growl out in the primordial forest and you don't know what it is, you're like, must know what it is. And then once you find out that it's a saber-toothed tiger, at least you know what to do, which is probably to run, actually. Yeah,
probably a good idea.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think if nothing else, in the training that we do and the training that improv helps you to do is to actually be in uncertainty in a place of confidence and competence.
Wow.
You don't have to be in uncertainty and be a complete sort of freaked out mess.
Yeah.
Uncertainty can be a place. And I think the way that works is that through experience. It's like, and again, improv stage is a really safe place to play with this. I walk out on stage. I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what you're going to say as my scene partner. I just be present, and everything I need comes from you. So if you scratch your head, then I can use that. I can say, how are the ticks? Because I've seen something I can use. You're like, oh, they're driving me crazy. And next thing you know, we're in a scene about, Lyme disease. Probably not the best scene in the world.
Not the most uplifting. No.
But I think uncertainty, I'm going to ramble here, so you just cut me off whenever you want.
No,
but
keep going.
I'm fascinated by the idea of it. And what I love practicing is just being not just being on uncertainty, being okay with it. It's like getting excited about it. Improvisers run towards it versus run away from it. And I get excited about it. I'm a surprise junkie. I want things to be surprising and unknown, or else my life's not that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Right. Otherwise, it's all figured out for you. And, we think we want excitement and unknowns in our life sometimes, but then we also get really scared by it. So it sounds like improv helps us to stand in that and, kind of lean into the excitement of it, but to also have competence to ride it.
Yeah, it does. And it's just a way to look at this idea of uncertainty. The other thing I think about uncertainty is that, when is anything ever certain? I mean, are we kidding ourselves?
Yeah.
When is it ever certain? I couldn't have predicted where I am now. I couldn't have planned where I am now. I think the same is true for my kids. I think the same is true for my town, city, street universe. It's like, really? And that's why I get I sort of laugh a lot. We do a lot of work in, like I say, in business organizations, and come help us develop our 5-year plan. I'm like, really? How about 5-week plan? Because I get it. People are going to sort of hear this and go, you have to have a plan. Sure you do, but you have to be available to be changed by what happens in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Be open. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about improv. So for those that don't maybe even know what improv is and what we're talking about here, so explain it from a perspective of how does it translate from theater to life?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe the thing to do is actually talk about it in the theater first, because I think you're right. We do a lot of work with large audiences, for example, and we'll ask at the top of an engagement or keynote, how many of you have seen improv before? And back in 1998, very few hands were raised. There was the British version of Whose Line Is It Anyway? Local theaters were doing things. Second City, obviously, is huge, but was pretty localized. Still is to some extent, depending where you go. And so just in its bare essence, improv theater is the idea that you are going to create a product, actually. And this is kind of how you can apply it to the world of business as well. The product that improvisers create in a theatrical sense is a story. That is what they're trying to make. You could say the same thing about an ad agency. They're trying to make a story. But in this instance, it's a story. And improvisers create that story without a plan or a script. And so they show their creative process on stage. So they don't go in the back and decide what's the very best way to develop this story. They do it in front of their audience. And so improvisers have to have a whole set of behaviors to be able to behave in that way. They have to be able to listen to each other, build on each other's ideas. You hear this terminology, yes and, which is very popular now in sort of in the world, in the zeitgeist. And they listen, they build on each other's ideas, they notice more, and they behave collaboratively. And so if you think about those behaviors and you just take away the theater, my question always was, well, where else could you do that? Where else is that useful? And the answer is really a pretty long list. Actually, it's sort of an infinite list. We used to play this game at On Your Feet, which was, where's improv not, relevant? And someone would be something like, traffic cop. Like, oh no, completely relevant. They have no idea what's going to happen. Astronaut. Well, did you watch Apollo 13? Did you see how they had to improvise to get back home?
Right.
Like, you can't. That's a fun game, and it's a game that's helped us develop this company because folks in all sorts of walks of life can find this work useful because it's about behavior.
Mm-hmm. You can't have any good story without improvising, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that from a sort of, if you think of it, I think it's fun to have conversations with sort of film writers, and I've got a very good friend who writes for television, and I asked him about the sort of aspect of improv. He goes, oh, in the development of ideas, we're improvising all the time. And then we hone them, and and, things like TV, film, and the written word, like books, improv is part of the earlier part of that process, and then it leads into into sort of more refined process. But it's absolutely vital.
Yeah. So, so what would you say to someone that would say, "Oh, improvising isn't for me. I need to have a plan. I have to have everything figured out, and if not, then I don't know what I would do."
Sure. Well, I mean, the sarcastic answer to that is, you really think you have everything figured out? Okay, so obviously it's about comfort, and of course I have a plan. Like, I have a retirement plan. I'm planning for my financial future. I don't think it's about not having a plan. I don't think it's about an extreme. I don't think it's about not having a plan or having a plan. What I do think about, though, is how much one relies on the plan and then gets completely sort of emotionally floored when it doesn't go as expected. I think the idea of having an awareness that absolutely plan all you want. Like, I'll give you a real concrete example. My colleague Shelly and I are about to hop on an airplane. We're going to go to Hong Kong next week and do 2 workshops. We have planned for those things. I have a running order that says, do this, do this, do this. I have a slide set that I'm going to show to my audience, and I even have a workbook that my audience is going to use. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to show up with that plan, and something that we had not planned for will happen within the first 5 minutes. So if we need the audience to write something down on a piece of paper, there won't be any paper. Even though we've planned for it, we've already asked for it. Something's going to happen. It's inevitable. And so the question is, how flexible and available are you to be changed? How available and flexible are you to shift off your agenda? And if you think about that, that's a big question. Like, what happens when politicians get together and they can't shift off their agenda? What happens when spouses get together and can't shift off their agenda? This goes way beyond the theater. So I guess what I would say to somebody who is sort of addicted to the plan would be to try to wean yourself a little bit off of that addiction, and then have faith that your brain will know what to do in the moment, because it always does.
Yeah. So it's about trusting yourself in a lot of ways.
I think that's right. I think that's dead on. Yes.
Yeah. Gosh, and how much more could you experience if you were able to once in a while lean off your own agenda and to just be open to what could come your way, and to just have an openness? Yeah.
And honestly, it's a practice. That's why I like to use that language. Somebody who teaches, my wife, she laughs at me. She's like, "You teach this stuff?" Because sure, I'm like, "What are we doing, next Christmas for our vacation? I need to know right now." She's like, "Well, okay, we can plan that, but it might change." So it's a practice. I don't go traveling without a map, right? I could. There's people that are way more kick-ass around that than I am. But I like to practice the idea of letting go of the plan as much as I can. And when I do, I feel like I'm rewarded. I'm rewarded with surprise, and I'm rewarded with delight, and I'm rewarded with new things that I didn't expect. So it's worth it.
Yeah. What is something someone can do to practice that in their day-to-day to cultivate this?
Yeah, fair enough. So it's a great question. Well, one thing, and I do this myself, actually, which is you should look back at your calendar at the end of the day and ask yourself, did this really happen? And did it happen the way I thought it would? Because some of this is just an awareness that the inevitable new thing, the unexpected, is always going to happen. Stop fighting it. So to me, that's kind of step one, which is don't fight the fact that that the new thing is going to pop up, that the unexpected is going to happen. Kind of go, I'm going to accept that. Improvisers talk about this idea that anything that happens on stage, they call it an offer. So if you and I are on stage and I trip over my shoelace, we wouldn't stop the scene and go, "Oh, let's try that again," because we didn't mean to trip over the shoelace. We just use it. You might say something like, "Oh, look, Dad's drunk again," and then we'd have a scene about that. So the same thing is true kind of with the unexpected. So if you want to practice the unexpected, you have to accept the idea that's going to happen at all. I think the other thing is to relax, which is crazy. I hate when people tell me to calm down. Then I get more
me too.
stressed. But man, if you have, to me, as an improviser, as somebody who wants to go out in the world and be surprised, I can't be in that space if my brain and my body are under stress. So if you want to sort of be more comfortable with the uncertainty, you sort of have to be more comfortable. And lastly, I think you have to notice more things in your world. You have to kind of go, okay, I'm driving to work the same way I was driving, but what if I take a moment to actually notice something I haven't noticed before? That produces something new. That is the uncertainty of that certain drive, and you invite it by actually noticing more around you. So those are a few things to think about.
Wow. Yeah. So I love that you said you have to relax and be comfortable. And I look at that as sort of living in a playful way, living in a open and just relaxed way. And I think that's why I think
Yeah.
improv and playfulness is such a connected quality. And to live in that way is to open up so much. So yeah, I love that you said that. And just to really look at everything that comes your way as an offer, not as well, that wasn't supposed to happen and now everything's
Right.
ruined.
Yeah, I mean, one quick thing I'll add to that is what happens with improv. So again, you asked, how do you get used to this? You can go take improv classes. Like literally just learning how to do that stuff is really helpful. One thing you would learn if you haven't done improv before is that improvisers see anything as an offer, as I said. And so they become practice at looking for opportunity. So if something bad happens on stage or in life, again, there's degrees of badness. But if something bad happens in my life, here's what I try to do. I'm not great at it. I'm not perfect. But I ask myself, what's the opportunity here? What's the offer? If something bad happens on stage, or if anything happens on stage, improvisers don't have the time to judge it. They can't go, I'm so glad someone pretended to propose to me on stage. They just kind of go, look, there's an opportunity. I'll do something with it. I'll say yes. I'll say no. I'll propose to them at the same time. Whatever. So there's really no time to judge good or bad. You just ask, what can I do with it? What can I do with it? That's kind of the mantra. So yeah.
What is the opportunity here? That is a mantra we should all just adopt throughout the day. I love that. So I know it probably wasn't always easy to get to where you are with in your career now. And I know you've probably had to deal with people saying, oh, what is this that you're doing? And maybe even overcome some of your own internal challenges around that.
Mostly
So
that.
yeah,
Right.
I would love to hear what some of those have been and how you've had to
Sure.
overcome them.
Well, let's see. So I actually feel really, really ridiculously lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it. So here's what I don't have. I don't have a lot of people in my life, or I didn't have growing up, people in my life telling me, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, we don't do that. If you do that, you won't be successful. Like I just didn't have that growing up. And I know how incredibly rare that is. I had both my parents were like, I remember this conversation with my dad really well. He goes, here's the deal. And it sounds very cliche, but he really meant it. And he still does. If you want to be a garbage man, I would be so excited for you if you're excited.
Wow.
That was it. And so, and I come from the background, my parents, my dad is actually a doctor who does poetry, he played concert piano for a while and was a peace activist. So he's like this sort of, and that's kind of where I get my, like, I suppose this sort of not overachieving, but just sort of workaholism, which I do have. And so anyway, so in terms of the adversity I didn't have that barrier, but the barrier and the obstacle is many in the sense that it's yourself. For me, for example, when I found myself doing so, I made a living for a long time hand painting T-shirts and selling them on the streets, which is a real mixed bag. Some of it is really, really amazing, but it's massively uncertain. You have no idea what my finances are still uncertain, so that didn't really change. But it's massively uncertain, and at the same time, it's what you know. So I knew this. I knew that if I painted 70 T-shirts in a week, then the craft fair would happen, and if it rained, then I wouldn't sell them. But it was a known, even though it was a really hard known. And I think the thing that was tough was, and we talk about this now at On Your Feet, was I call them the give up your T-shirts moment. Like, when are you going to give up the T-shirts, even though you know, because you know it, but it's not fulfilling you and it doesn't fulfill your soul. It didn't fulfill my soul. I still have like aftershocks if I go to a craft fair. Like, I can't be there. Like, my body freaks out.
Wow.
At craft fairs, which is a weird thing to have. Sort
Traumatic.
of, it's true. It's like I've post-stress disorder around craft fairs. But it was hard. It took 2 years to get out of the T-shirt business and explore the improv and the other work I wanted to do, because I was holding on to something that was known, even though it was bad for me. And so I think that as an obstacle in general. My partner Brad, he's the same thing. He sort of had this sort of 9-to-5 job. He was at the university. He's like, I'm going to have to give this up to do the thing I really want to do, which is this work. So I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is, as somebody, and I think this is anybody, as creative beings, as human beings are, and I remember first doing this work and doing it in ad agencies, being baffled that there was a department called the creative department. I was like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean everyone else isn't?
Right.
And I got a lot of shit for that. They were like, well, some people said that's true. I was like, no, it can't be true. And so part of our work was to sort of prove them wrong. It was like secretaries are as creative directors, just in their own way. And so you should explore that. You should tap it. And that's a resource as an organization you want to know about. So I do think as creative individuals, we are our own worst enemy. And that is about that voice in your head that is not good enough. I'm not good enough and I've not done enough. And that voice is still prominent in my head. I don't need really to paint another domino robot, right? I paint over 51,000 of these things. And we can talk about this later if you want, but I'm just using an example of like, why do I do that? And I think I do it because I don't think I've done enough. And so, you know, am I good enough is a question that percolates in my head all the time, regardless of achievement or how wonderful my life looks from the outside. I still have tons of doubts about that.
Yeah.
So that's where it pops in.
Oh, and I don't think that ever goes away for anyone. I think it's all in our head, right? Probably, maybe even. Actually, I don't know. I was like, does The Rock have that in his head? He's the one person that I would think maybe wouldn't, but.
I think you'd be really surprised, although I have no evidence of that. I think it's part of the human condition.
Right.
And think about how we express ourselves or put ourselves out in the world now. It's so easy just to put out everything that is great about you. Therefore, I think those conversations of self-doubt get even more and more buried. It's too vulnerable to talk about the places where you think you fall down or you fail. So we don't anymore. And I think those conversations are actually getting further suppressed versus being part of the conversation.
Definitely. And it's not maybe even not having it go away, but just learning to dance with that voice a little better and learning to improvise with it better.
Yeah. Or at least like there is, you know, and it's funny, I sort of like to dabble in sort of mindfulness and that kind of work. And there is this whole school of thought, which is like, just notice that it's there and go, yep, there it is. Here I am wondering if I'm good enough again, or here I am second guessing 15 times before I can write a sentence in a book that I'm writing because I wonder if it all looks smart or interesting or funny. There's just knowing that it's there. Yeah.
And in some ways, the work that you do is helping others to know that they are good enough in some ways.
How do you mean? I hope so. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I think because people come in with these misconceptions about themselves around improv and what does that mean? You know, they're not improv people, or they're not suited for this, and you're essentially facilitating and guiding them to show them actually you are, and you can do this.
Yeah, I mean that kind of brings up the topic of the whole podcast for you, which is about play, right? So I think play is an amazing device to sort of, and I don't mean this in the bad way, like to trick people into doing things that they wouldn't normally do. If you make it playful, they're like, oh my God. And then you kind of go, do you see what you just did? And they're like, oh yeah. So for example, we're doing some work here in Portland with a manufacturing company, and we're working with folks that are like in the warehouses and they're like building stuff. And these guys show up to a workshop and suddenly it's got the word improv on it. And honestly, they're totally skeptical. They're like, what is this shit? Honestly, it's like when they walk in the door. And we know that. And so we play with it. We're like, all right, look, here's the deal. You're here because someone told you had to be here, and we're going to be doing some improv stuff. Here's what we know. When people hear the word improv, they're filled with like two emotions, just dread and fear. And then we go, well, and tough shit, because we just locked the doors and we're going to get going. And they think, right.
You're trapped.
You're sort of, yeah. And they're like, oh, at least this guy gets where we're coming from, even if it still is a bunch of crap. And then you start getting them to play really fast. You do something like stand up and, let's reenact the stages of evolution from flatworm to human beings in 5 seconds. And I won't explain that game, but it actually is a game. And they're like, and you can win, which gets them sort of roped in because it's playful, but it's got some kind of a winning component. So we'll say things like, and the first 10 people that finish this thing or do this thing, win. And like, let's go. And no one even bothers to ask what they're going to win, which is nothing, actually. And so next thing you know, play has transformed the sort of doubt and skepticism, which, by the way, is just another way of not wanting to deal with the uncertainty, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they want to deal with uncertainty of a weird improv playful workshop, but next thing you know, they're doing it. And so it really is kind of the key, is the idea of playing.
For sure. And what kind of, so with that group in particular, I'm curious, what any specific epiphanies that came out of that group? Because that, I imagine that's a hard group to crack, but you got them playing.
And sure. And again, the way to talk about sort of learning an epiphany is really to look at the objective of the thing in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just to get together and have a great time, because you can do that with bowling. It's like, so improv is another way, the objective is that you had folks that sort of worked in the warehouse that had to work with another team that interfaced with them really clearly. And the communication between those two teams was pretty lousy, actually. Yeah. And stuff was getting dropped. I mean, literally getting dropped. And communication wasn't working. Clients weren't getting what was delivered. So how do they connect better to be able to work better? What tools could we give them? Improv's got some of that stuff. So I think the epiphany it wasn't that no one walked away saying like, oh my God, we should play more. Because that wasn't the purpose of the workshop. Right. The purpose of the workshop was we should take a moment and notice what those other people are doing and not be thinking about ourselves all the time. And this I think did change in that room. How could we not see them as adversary, but see them as a partner? Because even though sometimes they make my life a pain in the ass, we're both trying to do the same thing, which is make that client happy. Mm-hmm. So I do think that shifted.
Yeah.
It took a while.
Yeah. But getting them to see that they're on the same team, essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
So
Yeah. Oh, and your shirt says Team Everybody, I just noticed.
This is like one of my favorite T-shirts.
Is it from WDS, actually?
It's from WDS, exactly. This is where we first met.
Yep.
Yeah, I got this last year's, not this year's, but last year's, which is a conference in Portland. You guys can talk about it. But anyways, that's where it came from. It's
great. Oh, gosh. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about BotJoy and the work that you do there. We've talked about On Your Feet. But tell us a little bit more about it. I love everything about it, and I have my own little bot. But yes, for those of us that don't know.
There's a little bot. Let's see. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. This one is, I'll talk about it, and then I'll talk about what this one is in particular. So, like I said, I think at the top of the conversation, I'm really interested in how you can co-create, how people get together and make things together. But I was pretty stumped around visual art. How do you do that if I'm just going to make a painting and put it up on a wall? How's that interactive? How does that involve the audience in a way that would be meaningful, at least to me? And so I kept experimenting with this idea, and I stumbled across actually, even to go a bit further back, I made a notebook for clients, and in that notebook was mostly blank pages, but every now and then was a little prompt to inspire them to make something with someone else. So even it's just about a conversation. So it was like, one of the prompts was, ask a niece or a nephew to pick out your next set of glasses. Like, that would be weird. And you kind of co-create that decision with them, and I don't think anyone ever did that one. But the one that wasn't there was, imagine if you were walking around the world or walking around your day being followed by a giant imaginary giant robot that would give you outrageous compliments all the time when you did something great. And I was like, that would be a fun thing to imagine. Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. And so I put that in there. And then weirdly, clients and friends who got this notebook with that prompt in it started emailing me and calling me and saying things like, oh, you can't believe what my robot just told me today. Like, it was working. It was weird. People were like imagining that they had a robot, and there are things like, you were really smart in that meeting, or you're a nice brother, or whatever. And I was like, that's fascinating. If you just imagine there's an imaginary robot, then it becomes real for you. So the next year, I decided to make the robot. And after a lot of dilemma, I found that if you draw on the back of a domino a little robot, it kind of serves the same purpose. And so I thought, well, how could this work? Let's just experiment with it. A piece of art that gets to interact with its public. So I made joy bots, and I left them all over the streets when I traveled for work, and people would find them and then send me pictures of things that brought them joy. So it's like, here's somebody with their bot and like a beer or their kitten, and then they would be prompted to leave it for someone else to find. And so this thing sort of became this bit of a pay it forward kind of an activity. I made brave bots, and I gave them to kids in children's hospitals, because it ended up that even though it's a little piece of plastic, it kind of can help you have a courageous conversation with yourself. It's like, okay, I can take this insulin injection or whatever. And so I just used it as a way to experiment with things. And I kept making them. And then one day I got a call from a hospital in Connecticut who had found out about them. And they were like, can you send us 2,000 of these things? And I wanted to go, yes, but I couldn't because I don't have any time to make 2,000 of them. And so I got more calls from people who wanted these things. And I figured out a way to sell them on Etsy and all that, which is totally uninteresting to me. But if people are desperate for one, they can do that. But that's the most uninteresting way. What I ended up doing was I just put up a piece on my website that said, steal this idea, and invited everyone in the world to make these bots and shows them how to do it, etc. And that's the thing, that letting go of the idea, what ended up happening was by far my biggest creative success and satisfaction I've ever had, because there are now hundreds, maybe 1,000, I can't quantify it, people out in the world making these things. And I get wind of them all the time. So social media, which I don't understand at all, but somehow I guess there's a hashtag. And if you go to hashtag botjoy on any of these platforms, you can see what other people are doing. And they're doing some really, really cool stuff. They're putting kindness bots out in the schools for the new students to find. There's other students there that can be their friends. They're giving hero bots to first responders during the Boston Marathon. There's tons and tons of things going on. Even the coolest one I heard, there's a school that made writer's block bots for all these writers that they wish would keep writing. And they sent them to J.K. Rowling, and they sent them to other writers that they love. So that's the stuff that really sort of blows my mind, actually.
Wow.
And it's happening all over the world. And it's just because of deciding to let go of an idea. So that's a bit about the bots.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and that's them in their small form. And then I do big murals with them because someone asked, can you do it big? And I was like, sure. Again, saying yes to stuff.
Why not?
Without knowing why. So but now I'm on a whole sort of tear of looking for walls and doing them giant throughout the world.
Oh, and your murals are gorgeous.
Thanks.
So beautiful. Oh, I just love that. And it makes me think of when we were little kids and we would have imaginary friends, right? Friends that would talk to us, or friends that would comfort us when we're sad. And at some point as adults, because we need to grow up, we let go of those ideas. And you've just found a really tangible way to make it work no matter what age you are.
Yeah,
and
it doesn't matter. Yeah, and all the imaginary friends, I've never given those up. I got them all the time. They like whisper stuff into me all the time. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah.
Right, and I love what joy it must be to just see it spreading. I just saw the New York Times article that where it was in a school that it.
Yeah,
it
that's the kind of thing. Like, what a cool. I seriously do pinch myself because sort of found a way to structure my life so that I can wake up to surprises like that. So what happened was, there was a teacher in Texas, never met her before, knew nothing about her. She found about my stuff because someone told her who told her. It was like that old shampoo commercial. And suddenly she's making these bots, and this actually is inspired by the article. So she asked her kids in her 5th grade class to make lots of different bots, including a register to vote bot that they would leave around their community. And when people would find them, there'd be a little URL, which this one has. And it would invite them to go to it and tell them, this is a go vote bot, and you can keep it once you've registered, you have to give it to someone else who hasn't. And anyways, it's just a small little thing. And that made it into the New York Times, which was like, woo, that's super cool.
So cool.
And then inspired me because it's like a cascade of inspiration. So this is what I'm doing right now is I'm leaving these, which is a go vote bot, which I'm making. And now this is what I'm leaving everywhere I go, and it has a little URL on it, and people who find it will get instructed to get out and vote.
Love it. I mean, I'd much rather get a go out and vote bot than a flyer, for sure.
Yeah, it's just however many creative ways you can throw at this problem, keep throwing it because something's going to stick, hopefully.
Yes.
So yeah.
So what's next? I know your life is probably open and always moving in different directions, but what's next for you? Is there anything exciting coming up that you're looking forward to?
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for asking. I'm working on a book project, so it's called Small Things to Try, which is a series of small books, mostly directed to the business audience that we work with. So small things to try to have a better presentation or have a better meeting, come up with new ideas. It's going to have a lot of improv ideas in it. It's got a lot of illustrations in it because I can't stop drawing. And then I'm also making a lot of murals. So I'm off to New Orleans in the next 2 weeks to make a big piece there. I've never been there before, so
Thank you so much for all of this. It was so amazing to talk to you. What's the best way people can connect with you?
Oh, Instagram, I do a lot of that. So if you go to BotJoy, you'll find G Hirsch BotJoy there. You can go to the websites, which are oyf.com and botjoy.com. Email me, Gary at oyf,
Yeah.
and I'll email you back. That'd be great.
Awesome. Gary, always a pleasure and love keeping up with what you're up to. You're just a joy in this world, and I'm so glad to know you. So
thank you.
yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the time. Thanks for asking the questions. I hope this was helpful.
Yes. Thank you so much, Gary.
All right.
All right. Take care. How amazing is Gary? I hope you enjoyed that conversation with him as much as I did. I've known Gary for a few years. We've worked together, we've interacted at events together, but this is the first time I was able to sit down with him and have a conversation about his life and the little wisdom that we can take away from what he's learned about living a life of play. So I thought I'd take a moment to recap a few of the things we talked about and some of the nuggets of wisdom that we can learn from him. Number 1, what could our lives look like if we ran towards uncertainty the way improvisers do? Because at the end of the day, not much in life is certain, and improvisers not only embrace uncertainty, but they get really excited about it. And could our lives look more interesting, fulfilling, challenging if we just learn to embrace uncertainty just a little bit better? Number 2, when something uncertain does happen, ask yourself, just like an improviser would, what is the opportunity here? What can I do with this unexpected occurrence that just happened and make the most of it and find a way to move forward? It's not about making life more certain, but it's about learning to be more confident and competent with it. Number 3, when you decide to live a life of play, creativity, and yes, uncertainty, you're going to have that voice in your head once in a while that says, are you good enough for this? Should you really be doing that right now? And that voice is probably never going to go away. Even for someone like Gary, who is as accomplished in his business, his art, and his personal life, he still has that voice sometimes. So all you have to do is acknowledge it. There it is. And then move forward anyway. And last but not least, don't ever get rid of your imaginary friends. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us today. Please make sure to subscribe on iTunes so that you don't miss an episode. Or if you are watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. And go to therecesslife.com where you can get all the show notes, where you can find Gary's website, his contact information, and other things we talked about in today's conversation. I look forward to seeing you next time, and don't forget to get out and play today.